Number 10. Sacred books. The Romans paved the way for many following civilizations, okay? They invented surgical tools, they invented medicine on the battlefield, and before this era, literature took the form of a tablet or a scroll. The Romans, they created the Codex. Pages stacked on top of one another, just bound pages. The reason you have homework right now to be doing instead of watching this. It's all thanks to the ancient Romans. The early Codex was bound wax, and then it moved to animal skin. This was a big step because early Christians used this new invention to produce copies of the Bible. Important pieces of history, so rightfully so, they had to be locked away from the public. Now back when King Tarquin ruled Rome, a local woman offered the Etruscan king 9 books. Now these books were ignored at first, but upon its second glance, the beat up manuscripts foretold the rise and fall of Rome. So for most of its time, these spoiler-filled manuscripts were held in the Temple of Jupiter. So if anybody wants to do National Treasure 3, I have some ideas, just saying. We could do like 9 installments. And number 9, corrupt fire department. Oh, here we go. When we think back to ancient times, it's not long before we come across an ancient blaze or some ancient wild tragedy where you're like, oh my god, how did that even happen? Something that reminds you that it wasn't always a party, okay? It was rarely a party, in fact. When we think of Julius Caesar when regarding the leadership of Rome, we often forget Marcus Crassus. He was powerful and full of bright ideas on the sidelines. Marcus ran the fire brigade. A lot of open fires, a lot of accidents happening at this time, so of course we need responders. But back then, these officials arrived on site to this blazing emergency, but before helping out, Crassus would demand the owner sells their property to him first. Yeah, watch it burn or sell it for a not so handsome price. The choice is yours. And also you have 38 seconds to decide. TikTok. Number 8, ancient drag. I'll respect a girl's night out, okay? Always. I get it. My guy friends have ruined most nights out that I've had in the city, because guys are dumbasses. That's a fact. Ancient Romans were ahead of the game with this one as well. That's why they made the festival of the good goddess women only. Yeah, statues of men weren't even allowed to partake. Statues depicting men at this festival had to be draped. Yeah, none of us were seeing anything. But then in comes Mr. Jealous, Mr. Ancient FOMO himself. Enter Publius Clodius Pulcher, okay? This man disguised himself as a flute lady, but when he didn't play the flute, and also wasn't a lady, and also nobody knew him, it was a little obvious that an intruder was present. A trial soon followed and the festival was then suspended. See, guys ruin the party, even in ancient Roman days. This dude's like, nah, I'm gonna go ruin it.
Number 7, the 9th Legion. In ancient Rome, there was a legion that was known to be the best of the best the Romans had to offer. It was known as the 9th Legion. Being the best of the best came with being put into the harshest of areas to fix Rome's problems. So these boys in red were sent to England past Hadrian's Wall, where they would fight against the Picts. But then, they were just never heard from again, ever. Now, the obvious answer here is that they got absolutely demolished by the Picts. The last thing we heard was from the year 108, and we know that the Legion had a pretty brutal surprise attack in Caledonia due to some Roman guards falling asleep on the job, which doesn't really seem like best of the best behavior now, does it? What makes this whole thing really weird is that in 121, there are some bricks that have the seal of the 9th Legion on them, which is about 13 years after their last mention. And on top of that, there is an officer from that legion who shows up as the governor of Arabia in 142. I think these could have just been survivors who were taken out of England after the best of the best went bust. But who knows? Not me. Number 6, Locusta the Poisoner. Nero, 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 you little rascal you. Emperor Nero was known as one of the worst, and he was also known for having a few people, de-lifed. What better way to do that than with poison? The chemist Locusta was the one who became his poison expert, but she's also kind of unfairly known as the world's first serial de-lifer because of that. Kind of unfairly because it could be completely true. We just have no idea. We know from historians at the time that Nero and even his mother liked Locusta so much that he actually helped set her up with a school dedicated to creating new poisons and all kinds of research surrounding poison. But we don't actually have any of that research. There is no proof of any of it. But she was executed by the guy who took on Nero's job after he was gone, and I can't help but think there is a decent reason for that. Maybe because of all the people she poisoned and helped poison? We will never know. Probably. I mean, we could. I don't know. Number 5. Play that liar to the fire. While we're talking about Nero, he actually has a mystery all of his own. Nero was very famously a fan of music. He would often sing and play instruments, and he was also a fan of being utterly insane, ending lives and forcing people to party all night, have massive parties, and eat until they puked. So when you hear a rumor that this crazy emperor may have caused the Great Fire of Rome that destroyed a lot of the city on July 18th in the year 64, you might believe it. And you might even believe the rumor that he also played the lyre while the city burned. It just kind of all checks out for how crazy he is, but obviously we have no evidence of that actually happening. Neither of those two rumors can be proven, especially not now, 1,958 years later. What we do know is that the emperor did benefit quite a bit from the destruction the fire caused. It allowed him to change the aesthetics of the city, persecute thousands of Christians, and introduce new building codes. It also turns out Nero may have been 35 miles away in Antium, but I mean, prove it! You can't. I can't. Number 4. Ham Hill. Ham Hill in England is the location of an archaeological dig by the universities of Cambridge and Cardiff, where we made the crazy discovery of the graves of a lot of people, dating back to the time in history when Romans made their way into England. The part that is so alarming, other than finding a pile of corpses, is that these particular bodies had been stripped of their exterior layers and chopped up. It's gruesome. But oddly, most of the skeletons found here actually belonged to women, and most of which were women in their early 20s. But this wouldn't be a mystery if those were all the facts. We actually don't know what happened here. The obvious answer is some kind of mass life-ending escapade, but why, damn it, why? We don't know.
At number 3, Aramaic. This next language is pretty special because it's one that is said to have been spoken by Jesus Christ himself. The Aramaic language was, in its heyday, the primary language because it was so widely used. This language is also the one that replaced the highly complex Akkadian language, which we will talk about in a few moments. There are Aramaic speakers, but none of them actually came from the country which this language originated. This dead language came from Aram, but the country fell to the Assyrians back in ancient times. However, despite the destruction of Aram, their language remained fairly intact as the Assyrians used it as a second language given its significance and popularity since it was the lingua franca of the Middle East. The reason that this language eventually died out was due to the diaspora of the people who spoke it. There was a point where some researchers feared that the language would be gone by the next century. However, thanks to the historical significance of the language, as well as the texts that still need to be researched in its language, Aramaic still remains preserved, unused but not completely lost. At number 2, Old Norse. Now let's talk about the language that was used by one of the most interesting civilizations from the past. We all know about the Vikings. We've done a few videos about them on this channel so far, but no one has really talked about how they spoke, so let's get into it. The Vikings spoke Old Norse. It was unique to the Vikings, but it ultimately died off in a similar way to the Aramaic language. As the Vikings split off and became individual groups, like Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, and Faroese, the language kind of just faded away over time. Though the entirety of Old Norse has been lost for the most part, some remnants still remain in the English language. Since both Old Norse and English stem from the Germanic family, they share similarities, and this is how we got words like cake, knife, and berserk. They came from the Vikings. On top of that, the word Thursday came from the Vikings' Thorsday, as in the god, and the word husband came from Old Norse as well, as it was a mashup of the words hus and bondi. And finally, at number 1, Akkadian. The ancient language Akkadian originated in Akkad, an old Mesopotamian city from ancient times. This language was actually the first certified Semitic language in history. If you learned about Mesopotamia, then you would probably be familiar with its written form of the language called cuneiform. Akkadian was spoken by the likes of Mesopotamians, Babylonians, and Chaldeans. But unfortunately, due to the language's inability to evolve, it ultimately died out, as I mentioned when talking about Aramaic, since that language was the one to replace Akkadian. This language is very much dead unless you want to learn cuneiform, which in that case you'd have to learn Akkadian as well. At number 10, Latin. Out of all of the dead languages, Latin is probably one of the most well known. You might be saying, well, it isn't completely dead because Latin is still somewhat around in society. While you do have a point, Latin is still considered a dead language because no one speaks it. It is still used to classify animal species in science and is also used in medical terms as well, but you won't hear someone speaking Latin just out and about. The most Latin that the average person would use in normal everyday speech would be saying some kind of Latin phrase like carpe diem, which means seize the day, or memento mori, which means remember you must die. Certainly not as upbeat as carpe diem, but it's still got the same principle. These days, the only country that uses Latin as their official language is the Vatican. And yes, for those who never knew this, Vatican City is its own country. The reason why Latin is their official language is because the Holy Scriptures are written in this dead language. They are the only ones who have kept up with it after the language started dying out after the fall of Rome. At number 9, Sanskrit. The ancient language Sanskrit is the oldest language in the world, but unfortunately the language died out around 600 BCE, so a very long time ago. Though it died out so long ago, it still seems to be holding on a little bit, even in modern day in some countries. Currently, Sanskrit is considered one of India's official languages because of the fact that many ancient scriptures regarding Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism are written in this ancient language. Sanskrit also holds on to a lot of popularity among scholars, as it is a popular study for many students because of its ties to many ancient philosophical works like the spiritual and medical theories written by the popular philosopher Vedas. Before we carry on talking about some of humanity's dead languages, why not consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this one. On number 8, Ancient Greek. Up next we have a pretty special language, this being Ancient Greek. Many people still study some Ancient Greek because of the works of some of ancient Greece's most famous philosophers like Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and Homer. On top of that, much like Latin, many scientific terminologies are written in Ancient Greek. Now, I mentioned that this is a pretty special language, so let me tell you about what makes it so unique. The death of Ancient Greek is pretty special because it didn't necessarily die out completely. Strange, I know. You see, rather than the language dying out completely, it simply got transformed into what we now know as Modern Greek. So really, it's not exactly the same, but it just evolved into something new. Now, Modern Greek is used as the official language of Greece. Even though the language, or rather some of its remnants, are still around, Ancient Greek is still studied to this day, and fun fact, many words from the English language are derived from Ancient Greek.
Number 7, Sewer Goddess. I love reading about ancient gods. It's my favorite topic. The Roman god of manure and fertilizer, for example. Where was that one in Hades? That would have been helpful. I would have beat that game in 8 minutes flat with him. The god of toilets. There's one we can't forget about either. Crepitus, okay? Every day we have to thank the god of toilets, right? If you haven't today, go ahead and thank them. The Romans regarded Glossina as the goddess of the main drain. The literal main drain to the city of Rome, all this water. This goddess was Glauca Maximum, aka Big Drain. Eventually this god was affiliated with Venus, the goddess of beauty and love. Yeah, love me some big ass drains. Nice. That's a lie actually. As a kid I was so afraid of the bathtub drain. I would pull it and then just immediately high jump out of the tub. I don't want to get sucked down like Ant-Man. Know what I mean? Number 6, death before combat. With most of these Roman gladiators, they're trained, they understand a specific style of combat, and they're paired with an opponent that's somewhat equal. And then hundreds of people go, yeah, and they bet on you and then see blood and stuff. It's horrible. But not all these gladiators are UFC fighters, okay? Not all of them are Kurt Russell and handsome. No, a great amount of these gladiators were criminals who were forced to fight each other in the name of entertainment, or they were slaves. Yeah, these prisoners of war were not really on board with fighting a lion with a dagger, believe it or not. They understood this was a one-way trip most likely, so many of them took their own lives before the combat even begun. This one story is quite haunting, but it makes total sense. Sadly, 29 prisoners, they were all set to fight these crazy animal battles in front of thousands, but they all strangled each other. They all took each other's lives with their bare hands because that was easier to them than walking into this nightmare publicly. That's horrible. The reason this was the easier choice to make, sadly, was because saying no to the combat or to the games would just lead to an even more painful public execution. So it's a lose-lose, sadly. They sucked. Number 5, loincloths. Going back to ancient Roman and Egyptian times, there we go, 2 for 1. The loincloth was of course used by all. Either that or you would just be naked. I found this neat step-by-step on how to make your own loincloth, and I tried it, and it's way more complicated than I could have ever imagined, okay? We don't have a lot of archaeological evidence because these linens barely made it through a decade, obviously. There's not a lot of bones in them that would hang out over these thousands of years. But ancient Romans would often use leather to make underwear. Can you imagine that? Hot goat skin wrapped around your waist in the sun? Oh, I need baby powder just thinking about it right now. We still use leather today when it comes to undergarments and, you know, zippers and stuff, but that's for another video. We'll get to that another time. Number 4, cesspools. Hey, here's a note. If you're gonna make a massive castle, you need to know where not to build certain rooms, in case you're building a castle. Anyone watching? Like say over a cesspool, as an example. Yeah, don't build anything heavy over here, or else, Let's talk about it. Cesspools were often placed under floors, which makes sense because, you know, gravity and life and stuff. But you need to make sure those floors are supportive enough, period. That's it. Or else, this will happen. Back in 1183, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire had a dinner in the Palace of Erfurt. But in the main floor of the main hall broke open, resulting in a bunch of dinner guests falling through said floor, with even a few drowning again in said cesspool. Yeah, it's a horrible way to go. And then again in 1326 in England, Richard the Raker had just sat down. The guy hasn't even started his meal yet, and then again the floor beneath him broke and he fell through and drowned in a cesspool. That's like the worst way to drown too. I'd say chamber pots were safer, but when it comes to waste, out of sight, out of mind. Sadly, just get that away from me. Just downhill, get it out, or else we'll drown in it, probably.
Number 3, hard talker. Surprise! You've met the afterlife. Were you a good person? Well, if you weren't, if you were a threat to your community, say in ancient Rome, then it's pretty likely you would have been buried face down. So there, take that. Hold up, they cut out your tongue and put a stone in your mouth? What in the Gaius Octavius Caesarion? What is going on here? That's probably what the team who unearthed the grave of a man from a Northamptonshire site dating back to Roman Britain probably said. They found a man who was buried face down in his grave, missing his tongue with a stone in its place. Pretty odd. Infection in the bones of his jaw show it was removed while he was still alive. And the practice of replacing a missing body part with another object was definitely known to happen in Roman Britain, although it was rather rare. The only thing is we have absolutely no idea what this man had done. Maybe he just really talked too much. Maybe he lost his tongue to something completely unrelated to his delifing, and this stone was just to replace it. We don't actually know, and there is no evidence to tell us. Theories? Number 2, skulls of London. I'm not really sure how this happens, how it was discovered, or anything, but in 1988, 39 skulls were excavated really close to the Museum of London in London. Those 39 skulls were alarming enough, but the 39 soon expanded into hundreds of skulls. Now, possible theories included that the skulls belonged to executed criminals, gladiators, or even soldiers that had done the Monty Python, run away! Most of the skulls seem to have been from men, and most indicated that they suffered rather brutal offings. Some people think the skulls were dumped in display pits. Some people think they were placed there purposely. To make matters worse, not too far away we also discovered what seems to be an ancient Roman cooking pot with bits of humans in it. All of this creepy stuff was found in an area no bigger than a swimming pool, which makes it very obvious that it was all a part of the same thing. Possibly part of some crazy Roman cult. Maybe it's all just a big coincidence. We don't have the evidence to know. I don't think I could really tell you exactly what in the name of Mark Antony went on here, but I do know that it were not good. Number 1, mole warfare. Who would have thought chemical warfare would make for a great story? Especially 2,000-year-old ancient chemical warfare. Back in the Roman city of Dura Europus in Syria, a siege took place between the Roman and the Persian forces. During said battle, the Persians dug siege tunnels underneath the walls of the Roman city. The Romans knew and built their own tunnels to cut them off. Problem with tunnels like that is you have absolutely no idea of where exactly the opposing team is going to show up. The Romans ended up building their tunnel higher than the Persians did, so you got like this kind of situation going on. Now, archaeological digs have discovered about 19 Roman soldiers in these tunnels. But it seems that these soldiers were not stabbed to cause their demise, but instead, they seem to have suffocated. Well, how the heck did that happen? According to archaeologist Simon James, he believes that the Persians actually allowed the Romans to dig into their tunnel, and then use the elevated position with a sort of chimney effect to set a mix of bitumen and sulfur on fire and let the fumes do the deed. But, and say it with me, there is absolutely no evidence of this. Yes. Good. You've caught on. Very nice. Number 10. We're making a video about mysteries from ancient Rome, and you think I'm not gonna talk about Pompey's own Villa of Mysteries? You balkin', mate, you balkin'! The Villa of Mysteries was discovered back in 1909 after being buried at Pompeii. One of the more mysterious finds was a wall fresco that depicts what could be a play or wedding, or maybe an initiation ceremony to an ancient Roman cult known as the Cult of Dionysus. We don't really know anything about what this cult actually did. They were obviously very good at keeping things under wraps. What happens in the cult stays in the cult. Or however that saying goes, I don't really remember. No one was allowed to know what happened in their initiation, rituals, or really anything. I mean, they weren't even allowed to write it down. But if that was the case, why was someone allowed to paint it on a wall? Make it make sense, bro. Make it make sense. Number 9, family traits. I think this one is kind of really interesting. There is a village in western China where the people who all live here, meaning their families are all historically from here, have blue eyes and blonde hair. While not exactly uncommon, I guess, the sheer amount of people specifically from here that have these particular traits that are different from the black hair and dark eye color of most people in China suggests that everyone who is native to this area may actually be descended from an ancient Roman legion. I have the blood of a legionnaire flowing through these veins! That'd be so cool. In 53 BC, Marcus Crassus lost pretty badly in a fight in what is modern-day Afghanistan. It's believed that the Roman soldiers that survived traveled as mercenaries, just trying to make a few bucks, and they apparently wandered as far as this village in western China. DNA tests on the villagers of this area actually do show that they are 50% Caucasian, which is super interesting, but we don't know for sure if it was these traveling for sale legionnaires that were the cause. And maybe I'm just a silly goose, but I don't even know how we would be able to find that out with some kind of archaeological evidence. Number 8, misleading. In 2010, we discovered a coffin in the city of Gabi. A coffin made of lead. It was also, interestingly enough, in the shape of a burrito, giving it the nickname Lead Burrito. You won't be seeing me going into Chipotle to ask for that one. Yes, I'll take one lead burrito, extra deceased Roman inside, please and thank you. No. The University of Michigan, the ones who led the expedition that found the coffin, said that lead coffins like this are extremely rare. But on top of that, this one specifically is incredibly heavy, like 1,000 pounds, letting us know exactly how expensive it must have been. The mysterious part comes to play when we realize we have absolutely no clue whatsoever who the adult man inside this coffin is. We know he was around at the time of Nero, but there is no evidence inside this burrito about the life this man lived. No extra toppings in this burrito, just lead and meat. Yum.
At number 7, Biblical Hebrew. The death of the Biblical Hebrew language is a pretty sad one. There are many ways for a culture or language to die out, and most times it has to do with some kind of conflict, overtaking, or assimilation. In the case of Biblical Hebrew, this language died out in the 20th century due to warfare and persecution. Biblical Hebrew initially saw its decline after the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, but after the events of World War II and the persecution of the Jewish population, Biblical Hebrew lost any hope of returning. Most of the rabbis who could have passed along this language died during the war, and so this ancient 8,000-word language transformed into modern Hebrew. It is still possible to learn the language, but no one really uses it anymore. One cool thing about learning this language though is the fact that it would be a much easier language to pick up than any other dead language. At number 6, Old English. Obviously, we need to talk about the language that came before ours, that being Old English. This is the language that came before the modern English that we speak today, and even before the middle and early modern English that you may be familiar with if you ever had to study Shakespeare. It was the first recorded stage of the English language that was used and spoken up until approximately the 1150s. Old English had 3 genders to the language: masculine, neuter, and feminine. Old English, also referred to as Anglo-Saxon English, was spoken by people in England and Scotland, hence the name. Eventually, it evolved into a more grammatically correct version of English that we call Middle English, and this old form quickly died out, giving way to this newer version. The English language has undergone a lot of transformation over many years, so I wonder if you'll see another transition in this language in the future. At number 5, Coptic. When you think of the ancient Egyptian language, you would probably imagine the hieroglyphs that these ancient people were known for. Coptic was actually the final stage of the ancient Egyptian language before it was replaced with Arabic, and it was written using the Greek alphabet. Coptic was also considered to be the first ever Christian language. It was created as a result of 4 different languages, those being Greek, Demotic, Hieratic, and the hieroglyphs. For some time, Coptic was preserved as a religious language, but it died out after about 300 years. There are no languages out there that are even close to Coptic, making this one very unique. At number 4, Ayapaneco. Now this next language isn't exactly extinct, but it is severely endangered because there's only a small handful of people left in the world who still speak it. Ayapaneco is a critically endangered language that originated in Tabasco, Mexico. From what I understand, there are only 2 native speakers of this language left, but the issue is that those 2 people refuse to speak to each other and no one knows why, which is a bit mysterious. People say that they just don't get along, but again, the reason for that is unknown. The reason that this language has pretty much died off is because of the severe lack of native speakers. This is all thanks to 20th century Spanish educational reform, where children were forced to not speak in any other languages other than those which were approved. It's so sad that this language has pretty much gone all because of outsider influence.
Number 3, Roman shampoo. Okay, when my hair grew out over the pandemic, I had a panic attack. I don't know what the f to do. I had a huge wake-up call. I've never had long hair before. I didn't know what to use in this mop. I still don't. Clearly, evidently, all I had growing up was the classic 4-in-1 shampoo for guys. That wasn't working out at all. That sucked. I needed some curl cream, okay? Separate jars of items, not just a 5-in-1 with mouthwash on your head. Those aren't good. Those don't do anyone any good. But the ancient Romans, they didn't have Head and Shoulders back then. What did they do? Well, sometimes nothing. They would dip their hair in cold water, and at public bathhouses also, very public, then they would rub and scrape away oils. Lime water was also used to wash your hair, but that was just as useful as lime wire. Sometimes Europeans wouldn't even use water at all to clean their head. They would rub their head with bran, like just a loose bran, before bed, and then they'd brush it out with a comb in the morning. Yeah, bran. I used dog shampoo once by accident. I thought that was bad. Bran? Be so itchy, I wouldn't sleep a wink. Number 2, ancient socks. Somebody got me socks over the holidays as a gift, and let me tell you, last year, I became a man. I was like, thank you, I actually love this. This is now the best gift of my life. Socks and lip balm. That's it. I don't want a PlayStation, get lost. Socks in ancient Greece, first of all, they weren't, the ankle socks. There weren't Vans skateboarding socks. There weren't the weird grippy ones that kids have. Where were those growing up, first of all? Not even close. Socks came around in the 8th century BC, and it was made fresh from animal hairs. This led to Romans tying animal skins around their feet, and then, tying it more and more and more and higher. Anything to keep it there. Now cut to the 2nd century AD in ancient Rome, the sock game finally got real. Romans began using fabrics instead of animal skins. It was now softer, it was lighter, and then later in the 5th century, socks were worn only by the most holy, which is kind of ironic because socks have holes in them. You get the joke, there it is. Socks were associated with the church. They were considered a symbol of purity. Socks would go all the way up your leg back then. Like I said, a little different than the New Balance ankle socks we got today. A little less holy. Finally, number 1, public bathhouse. This last one, okay, we haven't moved on from this at all. That's why I wanted to finish this list. Nice little fresh, fun reminder from Taylor McWaters. Here we go. We still bathe together, a lot. We go to water parks and we swim around in pools filled with pee. Ancient Roman bathhouses were the older, slightly yuckier versions of water parks. They would literally spread intestinal parasites. They were actually way worse. And these massive rooms with giant pools just lie disease, nude. There were dicks and everyone was sweaty and it was all tight and there was no filtration system. It was like an indoor hot tub without the pumps or the salts. It was gross. The Romans were literally figuring out sewage systems at the same time, which I of course mentioned earlier, but they were also the first to create heated public baths. Yeah, my above ground pool wasn't heated, but the ancient Romans, they had heated pools. Great, I gotta send an email to my dad this afternoon, now I'm pissed. The archaeology and anthropology department at Cambridge discovered that Romans brought lots of parasites to Europe. Yeah, the fossilized feces showed that these heated, relaxing, rejuvenating bathhouses nearby were all but. Yeah, they were horrible. They were just spreading hot disease, coming in hot. I don't mean to undermine the ancient Romans. To be fair, they also brought with them lice and fleas. Ayo, this one for the road.